The morning I finally understood what the old man at the end of our road had been doing all those years. I was standing in his dooryard with a coffee can full of nails in one hand, and no good reason to be holding it. The can had been on his porch rail since before we moved in. I had walked past it 100 times. That morning it was on the ground, tipped, the nails scattered in the frost, and every one of them pointed the same direction. Toward the tree line. I am not a man who reads meaning into spilled hardware. I had spent 40 years on water systems, on pumps and pressure tanks and well casings. And the first thing the work teaches you is that things fall the way gravity tells them to, and not the way a story wants them to. 40 nails do not point one way by accident. And the old man who would have set them there was 3 days dead, and I stood in his yard holding a can I had picked up off the ground without deciding to, and I could not make my hand put it back. My name is Walt Sorensen. We had been on Caraway Road for 11 years. By then, my wife Lena and I in a house we bought cheap, because it sat at the dead end of a county spur that the plow truck forgot half the winters. 11 years is long enough to learn a road. I knew which culverts backed up in the thaw, and which neighbor ran his generator at 2 in the morning, and which dog would chase the truck to the property line and no farther. I knew the old man, too, the way you know a feature of the land. His place was the last one before the road quit, and the woods took over a low, gray house with a metal roof gone, the color of a storm, and he had been there since long before. Anyone I could ask, people called him Asa. I never learned if that was a first name or a last. He kept to himself in a way that did not invite correction. I fixed water for a living, which means I spent my days in other people's basements and crawl spaces and well pits, listening to the sounds machines make when they are about to fail. That is the whole job if you do it right. You learn the sound of a thing working, and you learn the sound of a thing lying to you about working, and you learn to trust the second sound over the first. A pump can run smooth and still be cavitating itself to death down inside the casing where you cannot see. I trusted my ears more than my eyes most days. That habit is the reason I noticed that summer that the woods at the end of our road had gone quiet in a way I did not have a name for yet. Asa and I were not friends. We were 2 men who had decided over a decade to acknowledge each other. He would lift 2 fingers off the head of his walking stick when I passed, and I would lift 2 fingers off the wheel, and that was the entire relationship for years. He bought nothing, as far as I could tell. He grew a little, kept some chickens behind a fence built far too high and far too solid for chickens, and walked the road at odd hours with that stick and a canvas bag I never saw the inside of. Lena said he was lonely. I said he was busy, though. I could not have told her with what I think. Now I was closer than she was. The first thing I remember being wrong was the chickens. Not that they were gone, that they were silent. I came home late one evening in June, headlights swinging across the dead end, and Ace's high fence threw its long shadow across the road, and I realized I had not heard a bird from that yard in weeks. Chickens are not quiet animals. They mutter and resettle and complain at every passing thing. A low, constant chuckling that carries farther than you would think across still evening air. I had grown so used to it over 11 years that it had stopped being a sound and become part of the road itself. The way the creek was part of it, the way the wind in the high pines was part of it. Its absence was what finally reached me, the way you notice a refrigerator only when the compressor stops and the kitchen goes wrong in a way you cannot place for a second. I slowed the truck. I rolled the window down and sat at the dead end with the engine idling, and listened, and there was nothing behind that fence at all. No rustle, no settling, no complaint. The yard was dark and still, and the high boards gave nothing back. I told myself a fox had gotten in, or a mink that he had lost a lot of them in one bad night, the way you can, or that he had finally sold them off, or that I was tired at the end of a long day and not listening right. The rational explanation arrived, and I took it because that is what you do, and I drove the last 100 feet to my own house and did not think about it again for a week. It is easy now to be hard on the man who drove past. He did not yet have the other things to set beside it. One silence is not a pattern. A man cannot live jumping at one silence. That was the summer the deer started behaving wrong. I hunted that ground every fall, had since we moved in, and a man who hunts a piece of land learns its animals like neighbors. The deer on the ridge behind our houses ran certain trails, watered at a certain bend in the creek, bedded in certain thickets when the weather turned. There was a doe I had watched for 3 seasons, a big-bodied old girl with a notch torn out of her left ear, and I could have told you within 100 yards where she would be on any given morning in October. That June and July, they abandoned the high ground entirely. The doe and her 2 of that year came down off the ridge and bedded in the rough grass at the back of my own lot, 40 feet from the house, in the open, where a deer with any sense at all does not bed because there is no cover and no escape, and the wind gives a thing your scent before you ever see it. I would look out the kitchen window at first light, and there she would be lying flat in the wet grass with her head up and her good ear turned. Not toward the house, but toward the slope, toward the trees the whole time. She had decided the open ground next to a man was safer than her own bedding cover. That decision is the thing I could not stop turning over. One morning I walked the ridge to see what had moved her. I found a trail that came down off the high ground and simply stopped in the middle of an open game lane. The prints crowded close together, in the soft dirt where the animal had stood a long while, shifting its weight. And then a single explosive set of bounding prints, 10 feet between landings, heading back uphill the way it had come. Something had stood in that lane and turned a deer around in open daylight, without a shot, without a scent I could find, without leaving its own clean track that I could read. I cast a wide circle for what had spooked her, and found, at the edge of the lane, the ground pressed down in a way that was not a bed and not a track, a flattened oval the size of a hay bale where a heavy thing had crouched and waited. I knelt over all of it a long while. I am a patient reader of ground, and I do not invent a story. The dirt has not told me. The dirt that morning told me a patient story, and I did not like a word of it. I told Lena none of this at first. There was nothing to tell that did not sound foolish out loud. Quiet chickens and nervous deer are not a story. They are the kind of thing a man notices and files away and forgets, unless he is the kind of man who cannot forget a sound that is missing. I am that kind of man. The silence at the end of the road got into me the way a wrong frequency gets into you. When you stand too long next to a failing motor, you cannot hear it exactly. You feel it in your teeth. In early August, I came home to find Asa standing in the middle of the road in front of my house. He had never once done that. He stood with both hands on the walking stick and his canvas bag over his shoulder, and he watched my truck come up the spur, and he did not move until I stopped and rolled the window down. Up close, he was older than I had let myself think. The skin of his face folded, recut by decades of weather. His eyes a pale washed gray that did not blink as often as eyes should. He looked at me for a moment as if deciding something. "You hunt the ridge," he said. It was not a question. "Some falls," I said. "Not this one yet." "Don't," he said. "Not this year." He shifted the bag on his shoulder. "And keep your wife off the road after dark. Both ends of it. I'm not a man who takes orders well from strangers, and 11 years of two-finger waves does not make a man anything but a stranger. There was nothing strange in how he said it. He said it the way I would tell a homeowner not to run a dry pump, flat, as a fact about how the world worked that I happened to know and they did not. I asked him why. He looked past me, up the slope behind my house, at the dark line where the lawn gave out and the trees began. He looked at it the way I look at a wellhead when the pressure reads wrong. Like the trouble was a specific thing in a specific place, and he could see exactly where. Because it has started coming down, he said. Then he turned and walked back toward his gray house at the end of the road, 2 fingers lifting off the head of the stick as he went, and I sat in my truck with the engine running and watched him the whole way. And I did not lift 2 fingers back. My hand stayed on the wheel. I told Lena that night, because by then there was finally something to tell. She did what I expected. She worried about him, not about us. She said he sounded like a man whose mind was going, alone out there all those years, and that we should look in on him, bring him something. She was not wrong to think that. It was the reasonable read. A reasonable read is just the explanation that lets you sleep, and most nights it earns its keep. I let her have it. I did not tell her about the chickens or the deer, because those were mine, and because saying them out loud next to what Asa had said would have made a pattern, and I was not ready to hold a pattern in my hands. The pattern did not wait for me to be ready. 3 nights later, our own dog would not come in. We kept a heeler, then a hard, sensible animal named Pitch, who slept on the porch by choice. She was not a fearful dog. She had run off coyotes and stood her ground against a bear that came through the corn. One fall, planted between it and the house with every hair up, more affronted than afraid, barking the low, chesty bark that meant she had decided a thing and would not be moved off it. She was 11 that summer, gray coming into her muzzle, slower up the steps than she had been, but her judgment had only gotten better with the years. I trusted that dog's red of the yard more than I trusted my own. That night in August, I opened the door to bring her in out of a coming storm, and she would not cross the threshold from the yard side. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps with her body turned toward the tree line and her weight set low, and back, not barking, not growling, just locked. The way an animal goes when the thing in front of it is too large for noise. The bark is a thing a dog spends on a problem it believes it can affect. She had no bark for this. That was the part that reached me. I called her by name, twice the second time with the edge in it she always came for, and she did not so much as flick an ear. She did not break the line of her stare. I went down the steps to her in my sock feet on the cold boards and put my hand flat on her back and felt her whole body going like a struck wire, a fine hard tremor running through her from nose to tail, and I looked where she was looking, up the slope to the black wall of the trees, and saw nothing. And the nothing was worse than something would have been. The wind was coming downslope ahead of the storm, off the woods and into our faces, which meant whatever she had was coming to her on the wind, full strength, and she would not move toward it. She would not look away from it. The air off the woods that night carried a smell I want to describe right and cannot. Wet animal and turned earth. And underneath it, something Swedish and spoiled. The smell of a thing that has fed and not cleaned itself. The smell you get downwind of a place where something died and was opened. I got my hand in Pitch's collar and dragged her up the steps and inside. And she let me, which frightened me more than the rest of it, because Pitch never once in her life let herself be dragged anywhere. And a dog that lets you drag it has done its own arithmetic and come out on the side of the house. That was the first night. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark front room with the porch light off, because the light only made a screen of the window and I wanted to see out. And I watched the yard until the storm came in and took the visibility entirely. Around 2 in the morning, through the rain, I heard it. A sound came down off the ridge that I have been trying to file correctly ever since. It was low, a chest-deep rumble that I felt in the floorboards under my boots before it fully reached my ears and laid over the top of it. Riding it was a second sound, a fast chattering vibration that did not belong with the first. 2 registers from one source. Like 2 throats working in one chest. It was not a coyote. I have heard 10,000 coyotes. It was not a bear or a cat or anything I had a folder for, and I have a folder for nearly everything that lives on that ground. I sat very still and let it move through me and did not get up to look, and I am not ashamed of that. There's an old animal under the reasoning part of a man, and that night mine told me, in a voice older than language, to be still and small and silent. I listened to it. You are not the one being hunted only as long as you do not move like prey. In the morning, the rain had stopped, and the yard told the story the night had refused to. There were prints in the soft ground, at the bottom of the porch steps, where pitch had stood her ground. I am a man who measures things for a living. I went and got my tape and my phone, and I did it properly. Because if I was going to carry this, I wanted to carry the true weight of it, and not the weight fear adds. The prints were not a bear's. A bear has 5 toes and a wide pad and a certain sprawl, and the front and hind feet land in a pattern I have known since I was a boy. These had 4 long impressions set forward of a heel pad that sat deeper than the toes, which is wrong, which is the weight distribution of a thing that goes upright more than it goes flat, a thing that carries its load back over its heel the way a man does. The longest print measured 11 inches heel to toe. The width across the toes ran near 6. The stride between them, where I could find the next clean one in the soft ground, ran better than 5 feet on level dirt, had what was plainly a walk, not a run, not a bound, an unhurried walking stride longer than my own, had a dead sprint. I measured it 4 times, because the first 3 numbers were things I did not want to write down, and the tape does not care what a man wants, and it gave me the same number every time. I photographed them with a quarter laid in the print for scale, and I hated the way I always hate. How the phone made the whole thing look small and ordinary on the little screen, a smudge in some mud, a thing you would thumb past without a thought. The ground was not ordinary. The screen lied, and the ground did not. I knew the difference. The ground does not lie to a man who has spent his life trusting it, and a photograph is only a rumor of the ground. I called the county that morning. I wanted to put that on the record, because later it mattered to me that I had tried the ordinary channels before I stopped believing in them. I called the sheriff's dispatch and reported a large animal and possible livestock threat, which was the truest thing I could say without saying the thing I could not. The woman who took the call was patient and bored in equal measure. She asked if anyone was injured, and I said no. She asked if the animal was currently present, and I said no. Only its sign. I heard the interest go out of her voice the way pressure goes out of a line when a fitting lets go. She would send someone when someone was free. A deputy came out 4 hours later, a decent enough young man named Cruz, who took it seriously enough to walk the yard with me and crouch over the prints and frown. He was young, maybe 30, with a flashlight on his belt. He kept touching, and a way of standing with his thumbs in his vest that said he wanted to be helpful and did not know how. He allowed the prints were big. He pressed his own boot down in the soft ground beside the deepest one, and we both looked at how much shallower his mark sat. And he stopped talking for a second, and I watched him reach the edge of the thing and then back away from it. He allowed he had not seen their like. Then he did what a reasonable man does with a thing outside his folder, which is reach for the nearest folder that almost fits. Bear, probably, he said. They get a bad hip. The gait goes strange. He'd be surprised. He stood and brushed his knees. Or two animals, one stepping in the other's track. Looks like one big one then. A bear's got 5 toes, I said. Count them. He did not count them out loud. I'll write it up, he said. Which is what a man says when he has decided the report is the help, and the report is filed where reports go, which is nowhere a thing this size can be stopped. He gave me a number for the State Wildlife Office and told me they handled nuisance animals, and he said it kindly, and he believed it. He drove back down Caraway Road toward the part of the county where the calls made sense, his tail lights shrinking down the spur, and I stood in my yard holding a phone with a number on it and understood in a flat, quiet way that no one was coming. Not because they did not care. Because the thing I needed help with did not fit any form they had, and a system can only send help for the things its forms have words for. I called the state number that afternoon and left a message on a machine, and a man called back 2 days later after Asa was already dead and asked me to mail in photographs, and I never did. I walked down to Asa's that afternoon. It was the first time in 11 years I had gone to his door on purpose. The high fence around the chicken yard was empty. The ground inside it raked smooth. No birds, no sign there had ever been birds. The gray house sat quiet under its storm-colored roof. I knocked and waited and was about to give up when the door opened the width of his face, and he looked at me with those pale, unblinking eyes. And before I said a word, he stepped back and let me in. The inside of that house is the part I have thought about most in the years since. I had built a picture of a hermit's house, clutter and rot, and the smell of a man gone strange in solitude. It was not that. It was the cleanest, most ordered room I have ever stood in. Every wall was covered, not with the madness I half expected, the string and the clippings of a man who has lost the thread, with records, maps of the ridge and the watershed, hand-drawn, layered with notations in a small, exact hand, a long shelf of bound notebooks dated on their spines, going back further than I could read from where I stood. And along one wall in plain wooden frames, plaster casts, tracks. Dozens of them, each labeled with a date and a measurement. The oldest of them yellowed with age, the newest of them white and fresh, and every one of them the same. 4-toed forward-set print I had measured in my own yard that morning. He had been doing for decades what I had done for one panic morning with a tape and a phone. He had been keeping the record no system had a folder for. He made me coffee. He did it slowly, the way old men do. A thing they have done 10,000 times. Grounds from a tin, water from a kettle. He set on a small wood stove, though it was August. 2 cups he took down from hooks worn pale where his fingers went. The kettle worked, he talked, and I listened the way I have never listened to anything in my life. He did not tell me what it was. I understood sitting there that not telling me was the whole of his discipline. The thing he had held to for so long, it had become the shape of him. He would not give it a name. He said names were for things you had finished understanding, and he had not finished, and he did not expect to. A name, he said, was a box. You put a thing in so you could stop looking at it, and the day he put this in a box was the day it would do something the box did not allow, and he would be standing there with the wrong idea in his hands. What he gave me instead was the record. He had watched it for most of a lifetime. It was not one animal, he believed, but a line of them. The ground passed down the way ground is passed down. A territory held across generations of a thing that lived too long and bred too rarely to be common. It kept to the high country in the fat years, where the deer were thick and the creeks ran cold, and a careful thing could feed, never once cross a road. It came down every long while, when something up there ran short. A hard winter. A disease threw the deer. A fire 2 ridges over that pushed everything wrong. The chickens had been him trying to buy a season, a thing offered at the fence line, so the thing that was hungry would take the easy meat and stay up where it belonged and leave the road alone. It had worked, more or less. It had stopped taking them in July. That was when he had known this was not a fat year merely ending. It was something else, something he did not have 40 years of record for. And a man who has spent his life keeping a record fears most the page he has no prior page to compare against. "What do you do," I asked him, "when it comes all the way down?" He looked at me a long time over the rim of a cup he had not touched. "You stop pretending you can read it," he said. "A track tells you where a thing has been. It does not tell you what it means to do. I spent 40 years thinking the record would tell me that. It will not. The record only proves it is real. What it means to do, you find out the once, and then it is too late to write down." He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table, squared it to some private grid. "Keep your dog inside. Keep your wife off the road. And when it gets quiet, the deep quiet, the kind that has no bottom to it, you do not go out to look. You sit in the middle of your house, and you wait for the sun. And you do not let it see you wondering whether to come closer. That is the only thing I know for certain after 40 years. Don't give it the wondering." I went home with one of his notebooks. He pressed it on me at the door, the most recent one, and told me to read the last pages and then bring it back, and I have wondered since whether he knew he was handing it over for keeping and not for return. I read it that night at the kitchen table while Lena slept. It was not raving. It was the soberest document I have ever held. A waterman's kind of document. All measurement and date and observed fact with the speculation walled off. Careful in its own margins. The last entries tracked the thing coming down off the ridge across the back half of that summer, fence line by fence line, week by week, drawing closer to the dead end of the road. The final dated entry was 4 days before he died. It read, in full in that small exact hand, "It is below the spring now. It knows the road runs out. It is not waiting for the chickens anymore." Then nothing. The rest of the notebook was blank. Asa died 2 days after I sat in his kitchen. Lena found him, on her way to bring him a dish she had been meaning to bring for a week, guilty that we had not looked in sooner. He was in his bed, and the county said it was his heart, and his heart was certainly old enough to be the reason. And I do not say it was not. I will only say that the back door of that ordered house was standing open when she found him. And Asa was not a man who left a door open. Not that man. Not ever. And I went down and stood in his dooryard afterward, and the high silence off the ridge had come all the way down to the houses by then. The deep quiet, the kind with no bottom to it. I stood in his yard, and I felt it press on my teeth, and that was the morning of the nails. The coffee can tipped, and 40 points of iron aimed at the trees, and my hand that would not put it back. The nights after that ran together into one long night with the sun, let in at intervals to prove nothing. I moved Lena's bed and mine into the middle room, the one with no exterior wall, and told her it was because of drafts. She let me have the lie, because I think by then she had her own reasons not to argue. Pitch would not go out at all. She did her business at the very edge of the porch and came straight back to the door and lay against it with her body, pointed always at the same quarter of the dart. I sat up the nights with Ace's notebook and a deer rifle I had not loaded for a person in my life and did not intend to now, because a rifle against that thing was never the point. The point was the same as his fence. Preparation that I already knew would fail, kept up because the keeping of it was the only thing between me and the part of a man that gives out and runs. It came to the house on the third night. I had been waiting for sound, and it gave me none, which I should have expected because the silence was how it traveled now. What reached me first was Pitch going rigid against the door without a sound, her lips peeling back off her teeth in a snarl that made no noise at all. Every muscle in her locked toward the south wall of the house. I turned off the one lamp I had been reading by, and the room went black. And I sat in the middle of it the way the old man had told me to, on the floor, my back to nothing, the rifle across my knees. And I listened to it come around the house. It did not hurry. I heard the soft give of the wet ground beneath a weight, that the ground complained about, a slow, deliberate compression of earth that traveled along the south wall and around to the east, pacing the perimeter of the house the way I have walked the perimeter of a building looking for where a pipe runs. It was reading the house. It was finding the doors. I sat in the dark middle of my home and listened to a thing the size of the prints in my yard, learned the layout of the place where my wife was sleeping,